All right, welcome to Improving Student Engagement During Virtual Instruction. My name is Robbie Marsh. I'm an assistant professor of special education at the Mercer College of Education. Just a little bit of history about me, just kind of to help you understand why I'm doing something like this. Prior to my position in Mercer, I was a behavior intervention specialist for the Clark County School District in Las Vegas. And I worked with about 45 different schools as a case manager, where I'd go into schools and I'd work with kids who typically were engaged in a lot of challenging behavior. They were really struggling in schools. And for the most part, a lot of schools tried to help them by using punitive discipline practices or your traditional suspension and expulsion. And so my job is to really, one, help kids learn new behaviors, new skills, but also help teachers understand how our traditional practices of teaching and education kind of contribute to a lot of problematic student behavior. So a lot of what I did was train teachers into how do we help them be successful in the classroom. And the great thing about this is we're not going to focus on a student, we're going to focus on the teacher or the person delivering instruction. And so it benefits all of the students, not just one student. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from with this whole presentation is how can you help probably the majority of your students with this kind of push to online learning that has not really been, well thought out. It's kind of like, we have to do this. So what is it going to look like? And we're kind of, building the plane as we fly it. So what are some things that can help with that? What I've heard so far from various colleagues, teachers who are also parents, is that we have a few issues with this push to online, other than kind of the technology that's, and access to technology issues that we're having. The first thing that I've heard a lot about is when teachers are teaching, kids get really distracted. When kids are at school, it's kind of sets them up for what they're about to do, right? And so just being in the building, being in the classroom, the place literally communicates it's time to learn. But when a student's at home, it doesn't necessarily do that. And so they don't really understand how to differentiate their thinking or the practices that they're supposed to engage in. And so that's one problematic issue. Also, there's just all of the fun stuff that most of the students like to do usually is in their house. So that's also highly distracting. And there's other forms of technology. There's probably animals around, possibly brothers and sisters. Parents are also probably teaching in that environment. There's a lot more noise. There's just a lot of things going on. And so it's really hard for them to engage in instruction, but also it's also hard for us to teach. Doing this right now and in teaching online, it's even adult students are distracted, right? Because they're just not used to learning in their homes, and that's okay. These are some things that we can do to help with that, and we'll get to that in a minute. And so part of that is it's not that they can't engage in their instruction; it's that their home environment isn't structured so that that's what they're supposed to do. So we can kind of help both things simultaneously, both with the instruction and the home part. And mostly, it's parents don't really know what to do. They want to help. They want to help their students engage in instruction. A lot of that is probably felt like them just giving kids answers or taking over because they don't really know what to do. And that's totally fine as well, right? We work with the tools that we have. So let's go through some things that can help not just teachers, but also parents in this whole shift towards online education. And maybe there are probably parent teachers out there. So this maybe can help both aspects of that. I know this is going to seem simple and easy, but as a behavior interventionist, I'm going to tell you that the two things that I'm going to recommend to do and go through, one, are a lot more involved than they sound, and two, they're probably the most difficult intervention to utilize because it doesn't involve someone else doing something differently. It involves you doing something differently. And it's always really hard to self-reflect and think that maybe I am contributing to kind of what's happening. And not to make anybody defensive, but that's just kind of what happens sometimes. So great teachers self-reflect, right? We're constantly thinking about how we did they learn it? Did they not? How can I do it differently? How can I be better for them, right? And then part of that should also be, is it the way that I'm providing my instruction? Is it the way that I've structured my environment? Is it the way that I go about the actual practice of teaching that is contributing to some of these issues? And the answers are probably somewhat, I would imagine. And I would imagine that it's also similar for the parents. Some of how you're addressing these engagement issues with instruction is contributing to their inattention and their difficulty. So that's where the whole "this becomes difficult" thing comes from. But really, it's going to seem simple, but it's going to take work. So I'm glad that you're here, because I'm going to try to help you put in the work. I don't have specific answers. I only have kind of a guide for you to create it for yourself, because it's going to be different for all of you. The first thing that we need to do is to create some level of expectation. Expectation just means, here's how you can be successful doing whatever that you're doing. And because I expect you to do it this way. And so for teachers, we do this very commonly. This is a very common classroom management strategy. When students arrive in your classroom, what are they expected to do, right? And how do they know that that's what they're expected to do? And that's kind of what we're going to get into. And then the second part of that is, do they buy into that expectation, or did they have some type of contribution to developing that expectation, right? So what did they expect of themselves? And how can you utilize both of those practices? So thinking about students, what should our expectations be? And then as a teacher, help guide that discussion in designing those expectations for a classroom. And really, those expectations are going to change from context to context, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So just when I'm doing reading, what are the expectations? When I'm doing math, what are the expectations? When I'm walking in the hall, what are the expectations? When I'm working in the home environment, what are the expectations? When I'm working online, what are the expectations, right? So that's kind of what we're going to have to define for all of our students to make it easier for them to just be successful, to know what we expect of them. And the second part of that is creating a routine. I can be successful, but oftentimes I get lost, as what you need to understand about children is they are not the best at predicting, right? That's a developmental thing that happens in the brain. It comes along sometime in adolescence and late adolescence. So predictability about the world is structured based on the things that I do every single day, right? And in the order in which they do them, and kind of figuring out how long they last for. And to the best of our ability, if we can create a routine or some strategies and supports that can help indicate what the routine is, where we are in the routine, right? It helps them kind of predict their day so that they know how to shift their attention, right? And we'll get to that in a little bit, because then I know, okay, now I have to pay attention to this, but then in a little bit I can take a bit of a break, right? Because that's what we do as adults, especially in all the work environments. None of us can pay attention 100% of the time all day. That's just not possible. So how can we help indicate to our children or students, now's the time to really pay attention, now's the time that you can kind of take a little break, and how do we understand that they need that and build it into our own routine, right? So that's what I want to talk about today. Expectations. To create expectations, we need to think about what, is our mission of our classroom. We usually do this at the school level. And so in the online environment, for you, the teacher, think about what is the mission? What do we expect of ourselves in this new educational environment? And for parents, what do you expect of your children while they're engaging in their online educational environment? But also, you can even extend that in terms of, what do you expect them day to day? maybe in the morning, as they're in school, and in the afternoon. The great thing about expectations is they're kind of overarching. They kind of set what we expect all of the time. The behaviors change from context to context, but the overall theme or expectation kind of remains the same. And so parents can sit down with their kids and kind of go over what some expectations could be. And teachers could meet with their classes or pre-design some of those expectations and kind of discuss them as they're getting into their online instruction. I know that a lot of you have already started. Don't worry, it's always a good time to go back and do it. So you don't have to think about, oh, well, I'll worry about this another time. Just start doing it, right? It will be tremendously helpful now. Examples of common expectations are just things that we would like to see. Usually we like to keep it to about 3 to 5, just because they do change from context to context. So it does get to become a lot to remember if we have like 10 or 15 expectations. And then usually what happens when you have like 10 or 15, a lot of those are somewhat related, and we could really, categorize them down to about 3 to 5. So these are some common expectations that I've seen in many schools. If you have a son or daughter, or if you work in a PBIS school, you're probably pretty familiar with these types of things that are posted around the school environment. So, be safe, be kind, be respectful, be positive, be engaged, right? We're highlighting the positive of what I expect you to do, right? And that's really important. Telling me what to do highlights what you expect of me. It's not like a rule where it's like, know this, know that, which is really like a negative, kind of sets the tone of somebody that's just looking for something to go wrong. Rather, we're trying to look at what's going right, so that we can highlight that. So we want to be as positive as possible. And when I say positive, I just mean tell me what to do. And so think about these and design them together with your class, with your kids, at home, in the online environment. And then even, if you do this with your class, as you transition back to face-to-face education, these will still be in play. The expectations will remain the same. The context might change a little bit, and the things that I have to do might change a little bit, but the overall expectation will remain the same. Those contexts is really where the kind of nuts and bolts of all this is, though, right? Because these words are very subjective, right? The word respectful, right? That word, the definition of respect is different for everybody, right? We all have our own personal definitions of being respectful or being kind or being safe. And so it's not enough to just tell me to be kind. You have to define how I am supposed to be kind in different contexts. And that's kind of our last bullet point here is, how can I perform that task given the current context? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about right now. So with these definitions, you need to be very specific as to how I can do that, right? How am I able to meet your expectation? And so the best way to do this is to use specific examples, right? A definition doesn't have to be like a dictionary-based definition. It's just tell me how to do it. And by doing that, just use a very specific example, right? So if we look at this picture of expectations for a classroom, right? The first one is be kind. Well, how can I be kind in the classroom? Well, I can share, I can take turns, and I can have gentle hands. And gentle hands might also require further defining, what that is, what that requires. But also, if you look down at the bottom, we have to teach these. We don't just say, now you need to share, because sharing takes learned practice, right? I have to learn how to do it. So we're going to get into that here in a second. The second part is, so once I have my specific examples, think about the examples. You want to think about examples that are, again, positively stated, right? Do this, right? Help clean. Use an inside voice. Listen. This is really important because this comes in later with the how do I recognize when you're meeting my expectations. So I want to make sure that I'm using positive language that says, I want you to do this. That does a couple of things. One, it doesn't allow for any loopholes. As soon as you start using rules with the word no, no cussing, no pushing, no running, right? That's an indication for a student or child to start to problem solve the loopholes of how can I still do the wrong thing, but not be breaking the rule, right? And there's just a lot of gray area when we use negative words like no. When we use positive terms, do this, it makes it very black and white. You didn't walk. You either did or you didn't walk, right? So it makes it a lot easier for you in terms of recognizing when it is happening and recognizing when it isn't happening. And it makes it easier for the student to know what to do because you tell them exactly what to do, right? This is a very important aspect of this. And then you need to teach these. I've always told teachers that when you expect a student to engage in a behavior, you need to teach them how to do it, right? Talking is not teaching. You need to go through a whole series of practice. And I always recommended teachers to teach their expectations the same way that they teach the fire drill, right? We don't just go over the fire drill procedures for kids, right? It's a safety procedure, and we need them to be able to meet those expectations because it's kind of for their own safety. And so what do? We go over it, what it will do, and then I model it. Then we all line up, walk through the hall, go out to our area for the fire drill. We practice exactly what we're supposed to do. And while we're practicing, the teacher is giving the students feedback about how they're doing, right? And that's how we should teach our expectations. So if you want in the online environment, think about what your expectations are, and then think about how you're going to teach those, right? And so maybe kids can do demonstrations or role play via virtually, right? They can show you what that could look like, especially for the class. Also, parents, what are your expectations for them while they're engaging in their classwork or going to school at home, right? And so can you model what that should look like? The most fun part of doing this is the modeling part, right? Because as a teacher, you want to do the right way and the wrong way. And it's what we call discrimination training. So you can sit in your chair in front of your computer like you're supposed to, right? So we'll say, oh, we want to be respectful. And that part of that is sitting. And then you can go sit the right way. And then you can sit the wrong way. Maybe you can lean in your chair. Maybe you could be distracted, those types of things. And then you ask your student or child to say, is that cool or not cool? Or did they do it right or wrong? And then listen for their answer. And then when they say, oh, you did it the right way, you can say, why? You say, well, because you were sitting in your chair, you were looking at the screen, that indicates that you're listening to the teacher. You can say, good, that is right. That's exactly what I should be doing. What about this? Oh, no, that's the wrong way. Why is the wrong? Well, you're not looking at the screen. You're sitting sideways. You're paying attention. You're looking at something on the ground, right? These are things that you want to indicate. So you're helping them recognize it in somebody else. It's so much easier for kids and adults really to recognize the wrong things in other people before they recognize them in themselves, right? And so when you model it the right way and the wrong way, it's what we call discrimination training. It helps them see exactly what to do. And then as a parent or teacher, when they're doing the right way or the wrong way, you go, oh, is that the cool way or the not cool way? And then it just is like a bit of a cue to help them get back on track, right? So remember, as you're creating these expectations and creating these definitions, you need to teach them. So what are they? Well, I can't tell you because it's going to be different for every one of your classes, every one of your homes. So think about that. 3 to 5 expectations, and then what are those expectations in each context, right? In the morning, at breakfast, during class, at home, after class, during dinner. What are those expectations? What am I expected to do? And that will really help them in just being successful. It's also going to help your own mental health because it's easier for you to say, hey, are you doing that the cool way or the not cool way? Instead of, getting into the, I thought I taught you this. We've gone over this. I've told you what to do and you're not doing it, because that's where we get into all these loopholes where things become problematic. So here's some just other examples of expectations. I just want you to see all the ways that teachers have defined these things so that you can design them for yourself, right? And so for this teacher, they're very explicit, right? 3 expectations, but look at how many definitions, right? How to be safe, using materials appropriately, keeping all 4 chair legs on the floor at all times. This must be probably a middle school teacher. We have a lot of leaners in middle school, right? So that's important, right? That's another, if you say no, getting out of your chair, and then you get kids who are leaning, and that's kind of not sitting, those types of things. Those are those loopholes that I was talking about. Being respectful, throwing away trash, right? Having a drink with a closable lid. See how explicit, right? These are things that I can really point out and recognize whether it is happening or it is not happening. Being responsible, showing up on time. That might be a good expectation for all of you, especially in the virtual environment, because I've noticed that even though we don't have to go anywhere, we tend to not be as a little bit more, I guess, we procrastinate a little bit more because we are in our own home environment, right? And it might take a little bit more time. So maybe that's the first one, being responsible, being on time, being prepared. Actually, all of these being responsible ones might be really important for you all in creating maybe your home expectations, but also your online expectations as well. This is an example of kind of definitions in different contexts. Again, this is a new world for all of us in terms of defining expectations within virtual online learning and in the home. So all of my examples are in the face-to-face environment. So let's think about how we can define our different contexts, right? So where in the home do these things happen? Where is your child going to school, right? Is it in the computer room? Is it in their bedroom? Is it in the dining room? Is it in the living room in front of the TV? Like, where is it? Ideally, it should be a room away from distraction, but that might not be possible too, right? And so based on that, think about that environment and then think about your expectations. So you see at the top, you have your expectations, right? Be kind, be safe, be cooperative, be respectful, be peaceful, right? Good expectations. But when we're in the cafeteria, how do I do those things? But when I'm outside, how do I do those things? And so I want you all to think about that as well. But for teachers, maybe think about during ELA instruction or reading instruction, what are we supposed to do? During math instruction, what are we supposed to do, right? Because materials change, concept of instruction changes, scope and sequence of what the students are supposed to be doing, level of independent work might change, those types of things. So let's think about how we can define our expectations in the context of each instructional activity, right? So during calendar, we do this. During reading, we do this. And if you're for older kids, right? If you're just doing one class after the other, that's fine. In our ELA class, these are the expectations, always. And so when you're here, you follow these expectations during morning seat work, during instruction, during the we do part of the gradual release model, or during group activities, and then during independent practice. So you can break that down and think about how those expectations might change in terms of maybe the actual setting didn't change, but maybe the context changed a little bit. So think about those things. And then we make kind of like a little bit of a matrix, right? So put your expectations at the top, think about your settings down the other side, and just fill them in as you go along. Don't get too verbose though. Remember, these are going to add up. So we don't want to create like this really giant map of what things kids need to do. And also remember, there is a lot to do, right? And we're getting into how hard this can be. So give it time to work. It's not gonna happen the first day, right? You're gonna teach it the first day, and then they're going to forget because they're kids, and you're also going to forget because you're a teacher and you've been teaching for one way for a long time. And so allow yourself that flexibility to learn as we go. Right? So we're going to get this, we'll get there, but allow it to take the time that it needs. Kids need practice, adults need practice. And so we really need to kind of forgive ourselves for it not being perfect 100% right off the bat. You can't run a marathon tomorrow. So let's just think about the work that it's going to take for these things to get into place. Once they're in place, the most important part is the feedback. The reason we are setting this up is pretty much because it's at the heart of it, a classroom management or a behavioral based system, right? It's how do I get you to do the things that I need you to do to be successful in class? And that's how you set it up. And at first, you define your expectations, along with the students, what we expect of ourselves. Then you teach them how to do it for you, right? Especially if you're like a secondary teacher, it's going to change from teacher to teacher. So how do you meet those expectations in my classroom? But it's not enough to just do that. We also need to have some level of feedback, right? How to ensure that I'm meeting those expectations. And the best way to do that is to recognize them for meeting your expectations, right? And so this is where the change in teaching happens. Up until now, it's been just kind of the fun part, planning, thinking about all the cool expectations and all of that, and teaching it, doing the role play. That's all fun. But now that we're supposed to be expected to do these things, are you attending to me when I'm doing them, right? We have a bit of a problem in schools where we teach kids how to get attention by doing the wrong thing. And that's because as educators, if we overly attend to kids engaged in the wrong behaviors, that's what we're teaching them to do. When kids are meeting your expectations and you're quiet, and they want your attention, they're going to see what gets your attention. So let doing the right thing get your attention, right? And so ideally, we should be trying to recognize kids meeting our expectations or doing the right thing 3 times more than we recognize them for doing the wrong thing, right? So we should be recognizing kids in the class. Hey, thank you for raising your hand. Thank you for showing up time. It's great to see all of you, right? These types of things. These are the interactions that we need to have with students. And so, and especially parents as well. As kids are sitting there in class, are they meeting the expectations? And so if they are, now's not the time to be quiet. Now's the time to ensure that they're doing the right thing. It feels good. When you go to work and people tell you that you're doing well, that they're excited that you're meeting their expectations, how does it feel? And then how does it feel when they're telling you that you're doing the wrong thing? And imagine if all they ever told you was that you're doing the wrong thing, how would you feel? Would you like that place? Would you want to keep going back to it, right? So it's the same for kids. So let's make it a positive place where we recognize kids doing the right thing, right? And the simplest way to do that is just to tell them that they're doing it, right? You can say thank you. You can give them a thumbs up. It doesn't always have to be verbal, right? All of those things, just cues and indicators that they're doing the right thing. Doing this all the time. This is the thing I get with teachers is they say, well, okay, so once the behaviors are in place, I can go back to my regular way of teaching. And that's just not true. This is how you teach from now on forever, right? Because this is the way to do this is to just keep doing this. And again, be forgiving of yourself. This is what takes the most time, is training yourself to recognize the correct things that kids are doing and get out there. And this is what makes teaching tiring, especially for parents who have been thrust into the teacher role, is you have to be constantly vigilant of paying attention to kids doing the right thing and ensuring that they're doing the right thing so that they continue to do the right thing. And so that means that you're always on, you're walking around, you're recognizing kids doing that, especially when they raise their hand. You're not just calling on them when they raise their hand, you're thanking them for raising their hand, right? So it's a lot of extra work that's kind of hidden in there. And we all need to practice the expectations. So this is not a do as I say, not as I do kind of scenario. If you're going to create expectations as a teacher or as a parent, you need to also adhere to them, right? So think about that. I always go back to my example of when I was observing a classroom of a teacher who was very, not happy with how the classroom was running. And the first thing that I saw to her was she yelled at the students to stop yelling, right? And to her, that was just what you do. But to me, I'm just saying, well, you're just modeling the expectation of communication in this class, right? So how can you also practice those expectations that you set? So again, be careful in how you design those expectations because you also need to adhere to them. This also gets into what I recommend for administrators. When I ask teachers to do that, to recognize meeting expectations of kids, I also recommend to administrators that they need to recognize teachers for meeting their expectations as well, right? Because being told that you're doing great feels good for everybody, and everybody should have access to that. Other things that you can do, maybe that don't fall into under that expectation guideline, is something that we call non-contingent reinforcement, just meaning that you don't have to do anything to get this stuff, right? And so being welcoming, smiling at your students, saying good morning when you all log on, or hey, welcome back when they come back from lunch or break. I'm sure there's a lot of you have seen those viral videos with teachers in the hallway who have all those fancy handshakes to welcome their students into their classroom. And you don't have to do that if that's not within your personality. I couldn't remember 36 different handshakes, but I can always be there and be welcoming, right? And so what does that communicate to a student when you're there, when you're smiling, when you're happy to be there? It communicates that you care about them being there, right? And so how can you do this? Parents as well. Hey, good morning. Hey, let's be positive about this. Let's help them feel like it's a safe place that they can and help indicate that now is the time for learning, right? And that's what we want, because that's kind of where we're having issues. If you want, you can have extra stuff added to your meeting expectations. Just remember, the most important part is that you recognize them doing it. You tell them, thank you for doing this, or it's so great that you guys are sitting in your seats, right? That's the most important part. But if you want to add a behavioral token system on top of that, by all means, go right ahead. But you don't feel like you have to. So lots of teachers have, points that they give out, maybe tokens that they give out, behavior bucks or stickers. But you can do that, or you don't have to. Sometimes you can cash those in to access certain activities. Sometimes you can cash those in to access certain breaks or after school activities, things of that nature. And they can be paper, which is kind of like what I have highlighted here on the right. It's just a way for a student, this is actually a self-assessment, but you could create one your own where you as a teacher can check them off for the student, or the student can check them off themselves, right, to help kind of refocus them in meeting the expectations. And if they get a score out of 6, what do they get, right? Do they get points? Do those points that they get count towards something? Do they get access to an activity, right? If you get at least 5 out of 6 points, you can go do an online activity. Do you want to save them up for the end of the day and earn something? Whatever it might be. Parents also, you can think about this in terms of activities. You can attribute things that students like, sorry, I keep calling them students, but they're your children. You can attribute things that your kids can do in your home when they're done with school based on how they perform within school, not academically, right? Because some days they're going to struggle, but behaviorally, did they meet the expectations? And if they did, what activities do they have access to? I would select activities that you could limit, that they aren't going to be able to do unless they meet the expectations. So don't pick something that they can have access to anyway. So maybe if they have access to their phone because they need their phone to do other things, then don't make it something that they can earn based on schoolwork, because they're going to get it anyway and it has no motivation attached to it. But are there some things in the home that you can limit to? You can do this, but if you meet these expectations during school, right? And then when you do, you can do it, right? Just earn it. And if you don't, well, we'll try again tomorrow. We don't have to be punitive about it. It's there if you meet my expectations. I don't like taking things away, especially, I also don't think that kids should have access to everything having done nothing. So we start at the bottom and we work our way up, right? We go to school, we do the things that we need to do, and that tells us that we are able to do these activities because we showed that we earned them. If we didn't do any of that, then we didn't earn it. That's okay. That's kind of the same. It kind of translates a lot better to the work environment, where if you don't show up to work, you don't get paid. But if you do and you do the work, then you do, right? So it's kind of translates a little bit more. We have paper-based systems, but more and more we're kind of transferring to online-based systems. One of them is Class Dojo. Many teachers are probably familiar with this. And so you can see here, these are the students in the class. And as these students meet the expectations, right? Maybe Hugh raised, or sorry, Penelope, I guess that would be the easiest one. Penelope has hard work. Hard work's a tricky one. So what did she do to have hard work? So maybe Penelope answered 3 answers on her math work during independent. And she'll go, oh, Penelope, thanks for engaging in hard work, right? Here's a point. And then Hugh has a question and he raises his hand and I go, Hugh, thank you for raising your hand. And I give him a point, right? Because you're meeting my expectations. This isn't the best example because with Class Dojo, they do allow to take away points. I'm not the biggest fan of taking away points, but because if we go back to what I just said, if you didn't do it, you didn't earn anything, right? So you should just be 0. I would really caution any teacher or any parent to let kids get into the negative, right? We don't want them to work hard to get to 0. That kind of defeats the purpose. So what we really would like is if you do the expectation, you get a point. If you don't, you just don't get anything. You still won't earn the activity because you have 0, right? There's no need to go into the negative. So that's expectations, right? We went through creating them, broadly stated terms like be safe, be kind. Then we defined what those look like in different contexts. And then we just attached a feedback system to that. So that's what you need to think about. What are my expectations? How do I meet those expectations? Or what are the behaviors involved during all of the contexts of the day? So during the morning routine, when they're in class, when school is over, or for teachers, during school, beginning, middle, end, or thinking about maybe an actual just scope of sequence like reading, the beginning of reading, during group work, what does that look like? And then how am I going to provide feedback? The easiest way, or probably the only way being, I'm going to recognize you doing it when you meet my expectation, and more often than I cue you to as corrective feedback to, hey, we're raising our hands, that type of thing, right? So 3 times more often am I recognizing you doing the right thing. One thing that really helps with these expectations, or kind of when I need to change what behaviors I'm supposed to be doing, is helping to give students a routine. And a routine is really important because what it does is it's kind of helps us predict our world, right? And so a routine is just a daily flow of events, right? So what's our morning routine? What's our online learning routine? What is the instructional routine within that online learning? And then once school is over, after school, what's my routine? What are the things that I do, right? And this gets into that predictability that I talked about, especially for young kids, and even as far as into high school. Kids really struggle to predict what their day is going to be, especially if they don't really have a good grasp on time. And so how can we create that predictability for them? And with this predictability, it acts as a cue for expected behavior, right? Because remember, we have a bunch of different contexts that we have taught you behaviors. Well, how do I know when I'm in one of those contexts? Especially if I'm in the same room, right? And it changed from centers to group time. How do I know that now I have to change and do these things? And so the best way to do that is to create some sort of visual schedule. The visual schedule does a lot of stuff, right? It indicates to me where we are in the scope of my day, and it helps me kind of predict what's coming up next. And I talked about earlier, it kind of helps me think about how to direct my attention, right? So if I look at circle time, I'm talking about the daily schedule chart over here on the left. In circle time, maybe I have to pay more attention because there's kind of call and respond, and there's going to be a lot of hand raising and doing that type of stuff. But as I transition to centers, maybe I'm going to be able to talk with my friends a little bit more, interact with the content, and then I know that I really can take a mental break during snack, right? And I don't have to pay so much attention. I can kind of think about the things that I like to do, right? And so it really helps me kind of direct where my attention should be. And also, the schedule is very helpful because it helps students think about their escape. Because we do this as adults as well, right? When you go to, anytime I've ever been to an all-day meeting, the first thing I look at is where I grab the schedule and then I go, okay, when is this over? And then the second thing I do is go, when's lunch, right? I need to know when I can get out of here because it's, maybe not the funnest place to be. And I know that I can go, okay, lunch is at this time. So we're going to be doing these things. They're not my favorite, but that's okay because it only lasts until this time when I get to go to lunch. And I'm excited about lunch, right? And so maybe you have a student who isn't excited about circle time, but they're excited about centers. So helping them understand that centers are next helps them get through circle time. Or if they don't like centers, snack is next. That's okay. I can get through this because after this, it's juice box time. I'm ready to go. Right? But just for the scope of your regular classroom, as we get into more middle school based stuff, same thing, right? Kids are planning their escape, especially middle school and high school students. They want to talk to their friends. And so where does that exist within the context of the classroom? Do you have a cooperative learning arrangement or peer tutoring that happens in the class? When is that? And so that they can predict, okay, I'm not going to talk to my friends now because in 5 minutes we're going to be grouped and I can talk to them then. Right? It just helps me kind of think about the scope of my day. You don't have to make a big fancy picture one that you saw on the wall there. Also, just to go back real quick, you see the arrow, we move the arrow to indicate where we are. And then sometimes we attach some sort of visual timer. A visual schedule really needs a couple of things. One, it does need a picture, right? And it does need a word attached to that picture. It helps build vocabulary, but it also helps students who are struggling readers. It helps students with disabilities. It helps students who are English language learners that may not understand the words, but may understand the pictures. So that's why we pair them together. But also starts to teach them those vocabulary words. I just wanted to get into this. So this is it's not as visual because it's kind of more of a use for older kids, but they have a lot of variety of apps to create visual schedules within the use of the phone, right? And so there's been a big push to engage students or engage them in their use of their own technology within the school context, right? It's very hard to keep students off their phone. And so I've always thought that instead of making them put it away and then getting in trouble for having them, because inevitably they're going to get them out, how can we just help them use their phones within the context of my class, right? It's a powerful technology device that can do a lot of different things. So we have started in education to think about what are apps that are helpful with this? And so some of the teachers are probably using Nearpod or Kahoot or Poll Everywhere so that kids can text, can answer questions, can engage in the content, right? So how often are we doing these types of things? But also we can build in schedules. And so I don't remember what this app is called, but if you just go to your app store and any phone device and you just look up visual schedule, there's a bunch of them. Some of them are free. Some of them are paid for, And so build one for a variety of schedules, right? For your son or daughter at home so that they can and really it's just to help them figure out what their day is, right? And so what this does is as they click on breakfast, it kind of tells you the things that you need to do. English room 105, as I click on that, then what happens is it opens up the things that I'm expected to do when I'm in that room. And then I go to reading and I open that up and it opens up the things that I'm expected to do in that room, right? So this is how those expectations kind of get embedded within my routine so that I know that when I'm in PE, the first thing I have to do is go get changed. And then I go meet outside on the blacktop or do whatever, right? So these things can really help me organize my expectations and help me differentiate when I'm supposed to do certain types of expectations, right? Are they all day? Do they change, right? And so that is another level of predictability that we would like to see. So for home, right, you don't have to just do a classroom-based or a school-based visual schedule. We do this as a Board Certified Behavior Analyst. I work with a lot of families with kids with disabilities and who need to be able to navigate their day as well. And we do a lot of visual schedules to help them. It acts as a cue to think about that. And so maybe you would like to consider making your own one for your morning routine, right? And if you have a routine, build a schedule around it. If you don't have a routine, let's create one and then build a schedule around it, right? Because that's going to help you with getting kids to meet those expectations. And then when they meet those expectations, what happens for them, right? So that it kind of all adds on top of itself. So think about maybe your morning routine and getting ready for school, and then school, the parent can kind of work with what they expect at home while the teacher is working with what they expect in terms of engagement. And then after school, what happens? All of these things can really help that student navigate the day. And then it can help you as a parent to know what they're supposed to be doing, or being a helpful guide within the home if you are there, so that you're not feeling like you can't walk in and give some sort of feedback, right? We see parents, they want to be helpful. So this is the best way that you can be helpful. All right, extra stuff. So that's creating a routine. It's pretty simple. It's harder than you think because we only went over a couple of things. Again, you have to build your own routine, but you can do it. And it's really helpful in terms of getting your expectations going. A couple of extra things that I just want to go over real quick. This is, again, you can't run a marathon tomorrow, right? So this isn't I'm gonna teach it today and then they're gonna be 100% perfect for the rest of the year for every class that I'm ever gonna teach. It doesn't really work that way, right? So we have to constantly engage in some sort of reminding or pre-correction, right? And so before we start our reading class, what are the expectations, right? Let's just go over them really quickly to help remind you. Or as I am about to start online school with the parent, what are the expectations as I begin? What do I do? What am I supposed to be doing, right? So we want to, instead of wait for you to do it wrong, let's set you up for success and going over and practicing what it is to do the right. We call these like little refreshers, maintenance, and these are really important just because I change from day to day. Maybe I'm excited, I'm ready to go, and I know them, and I'm good. But maybe I had a tired morning, I don't feel great, but I still got to go to school. And so it just is going to help me, because if I don't already feel great, then getting in trouble makes it even worse. So how can we help you be successful before, without waiting for you to not do it the right way, right? Again, always attend to expected behaviors. We want to recognize kids doing the right thing 3 times more often than we give corrective feedback. And that's really hard. And then if a student is struggling, it doesn't mean that they can't do it. It just means that they need to be retaught, right? They don't need to be punished. We don't need to take away points. We don't need to make threats. We don't need to do those types of things. We need to reteach. That's important, right? And if we're dealing with some level of types of disability, we see a lot of ADHD, kids with autism, kids with emotional behavior disorders. Well, reteaching might have to happen a little bit different for that student than it did for other students. So what does that look like? Maybe they need a more personalized visual schedule to help them meet those expectations rather than just a whole class visual schedule, right? Those types of things. And you have some, when we get into kids with disabilities, usually there's other lines of support for that. So if you're a special education teacher, this is really where you can help the general education teacher and the family, because there's a little bit more specificity in terms of designing those things. So in closing, just think about these 2 strategies. We went over quite a bit of stuff, right? And just I hope you just pull this back up and go through it, fast forward, stop and slow down as you're starting to build your expectations. Feel free to copy any of those expectations, or even if you don't know where to start, just search it in Google, right? Because thousands of them will come up, especially in Google Images. So there's a lot of resources that you can use to find these things. But they are so popular because they do improve student behavior, right? Because it helps me know exactly what I'm supposed to do. And when I know what I'm supposed to do, it helps with engagement because I don't have to worry about what am I supposed to do. It's very clear. And when we do these things, we create a number of other kind of byproduct outcomes. It creates positive teacher-student relationships, right? And if you're not a researcher or you didn't know this, that a positive teacher-student relationship is what we call an evidence-based practice. If students know that you care about them, that you're able to recognize good in them, then they're more likely to do what you expect of them because they know you care, right? And how do you communicate that you care? you recognize them, meaning your expectations. That's one way to do it. And you smile at the door. That gets into that non-contingent stuff. You recognize them. You say good morning. All of those things. They really amount to a lot of positive stuff, right? That's really beneficial for kids. And in general, they start to like school more, so they're more likely to show up. Because if they don't come to school, I can't help you, right? And so we want them to come. And so when they do come, they need to feel like they are welcomed, that we're excited that we're there. Even if we're tired too, we're still excited. Also, it can create that positive school to home relationship, which is also really, really important, right? This gets into a whole kind of thing that we call culturally responsive pedagogy, where we're trying to embed, take the values of the home, the diverse environments of the kids that we're working with, and kind of bring them into the school, right? We want to celebrate diversity. And the best way to do that is to work with parents and work with the home. So if the home is able to build their expectations, can we utilize some of those within our online learning expectations or our school expectations? And once that's reflected, it's really easy for the child to be able to engage in them because they're fairly similar, but two, it makes the parent feel like they have some role in their child's education because they should and because they're the parent, right? And we want to create those positive school to home relationships. Also an evidence-based practice, the more we can get parents involved in the education of their children and the better relationships we have with their children, the better it is for everybody. And what that ultimately does is it creates a safe and positive learning environment, right? Safe, we always think that word safe means physical safety, but it means like safe in terms of we value a diversity of thought. We value diversity of race and ethnicity. We value diversity of skills and abilities within this school, right? We value all people and what they bring to the table. And because of that, this environment is positive, right? We're bringing everything in. We're not an island, right, that's different than the community. We are a part of the community, right? And we really want to be a part of the community. So hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully maybe some of you have been doing this and you just didn't know what it was called. Feel free to reach out to me. It's marsh_rj@mercer.edu. If you have questions about this, I'm happy to help. But it is also online environment learning for me right now. So maybe I'll do my best to get back to you, but hopefully this was helpful. And I look forward to maybe hearing some feedback about what your experience was in creating your expectations and your routines for your home or in your class and kind of what that looked like. So thank you so much.